Hello, everyone. Those of you who are going to watch and those of you who are going to listen. This is Gerard Robinson. I'm the Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies and Culture Foundation in beautiful Charlottesville, Virginia. And I'm also a fellow of practice at the Institute for Advanced Studies at the University of Virginia. As you know, I get a chance to pull together great people from across the country to talk about education topics. Some of those topics are K-12 specific, some are higher ed, where you're going to be for a treat because today we're actually going to blend the two to talk about higher ed and K-12. And the reason we're doing so is because this is the end of the year conversation. And there's a lot that took place in 2021, both good, bad, ugly, and hopeful. And what we want to do today is just really to talk to people who've seen this at different levels along the spectrum of education. For those who have lost family members, friends, educators, loved ones, our condolences go out to you. This has been a tough year on emotional aspect as well as just personal. So I want to say that from all of us. For our teachers, educators, chancellors, presidents, those in public policy who are with us today and who've had to walk the very strong tightrope of policy, politics, personalities, and people. These things aren't always really easy to do. But we know that the school system that we have right now and those who go into higher ed, they depend upon us to make smart decisions. And so what we're going to do is talk about what we did the past year. And the four people I have with us are well suited to do so. So I have Derrell Bradford, who is the president of 50 CAN. I've got Kathy Hebda, who is the chancellor for the Florida College System. I have Marguerite Roza, who is a research professor at Georgetown University and also the director of the Edgeonomics Lab. And we have Elisa Clements, who is the CEO. Actually, she's the chief operating officer of American Federation for Children. So let me welcome all of you to our conversation today. Thanks for joining me. So what I like to do for those who will watch or listen is to give them an opportunity to know who each of you are personally. They'll have an opportunity to learn about your background, your professional work, but all of you traveled a path that led you to the role you're in today. And so the personal story is always something of interest to us. So when people hear Derrell, who is Derrell Bradford and what's your journey that brought you to the position you're in right now?
So right now, for the people who are watching this, Derrell Bradford is a guy on a sinking stool. So I'm just going to put it out there because it keeps happening. So one of the, I always try to figure out how to tell this story. So, I moved to Manhattan after I graduated from college, and I worked in publishing because I always liked to write. That was my thing. And I was running this magazine, and it folded in August 2001, and then 9/11 happened like 2 weeks later. And the publishing industry was contracting. There was a lot of stuff going on, and I looked for a job for a really long time after that. And then in the spring of that year, a friend of mine from college said, my dad just started this nonprofit in New Jersey. Maybe you could help him. And on April 17th, 2002, I got on a plane and I went to Milwaukee to learn about the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program, right? And that was kind of like the beginning of my education on education policy. And it's funny, like you're an adult and conversations you hear as a kid make a lot more sense. And sort of after I'd done that, I remembered one of the first conversations sort of like really put it together was my mother and my grandmother sitting at the kitchen table in Southwest Baltimore talking about whose address we were going to use so I could go to the middle school I was not zoned for, right? Which was in the Bolton Hill section of Baltimore, not the Sandtown Winchester section of Baltimore where I am from. And all of a sudden it just all kind of like locked into view. I was like, oh man, like all these rules I broke, like basically we could have gone to jail for us trying to figure out how to get me into the school that would have been, sort of best for me. So that was my sort of first intro into the world of education policy. It's been a long ride, and I've had the opportunity to sort of like meet, know, and admire other people on this Zoom or podcast, if you're just listening, in the past. And thanks for having me here today.
And for those of you who heard him say he could have gone to jail, he recently moderated a panel in Florida with a young lady who actually, her father went to prison. He ended up dying there because they said he stole an education. I grew up in Los Angeles, California. Trust me, there are a lot of people I know who use other addresses for better education. But when it came to the athletes, no one ever were concerned whether or not they were going to steal education, as long as they could steal a basketball or throw a football. But that is another story. So let's jump over to you, Kathy Hebda. You are now in a very powerful position. But before that, who's Kathy and what led you to the point you're at right now?
Thanks very much, Gerard, and thanks for having me here today. I had the great privilege of working with you when you were Commissioner of Education in Florida. That was a few years ago. But before that, I actually started into education because I wanted to teach music. Actually, if I stayed with my plan, I would be a high school choral director right now, which I'm not. I went a different path. And although I learned so much from teaching middle school music, teaching adolescent girls and boys how to sing was an education for me. And I had the privilege of doing that for 6 years and just had a turn of events when I moved back to Tallahassee to get married. There was only one music teaching job available. It was an elementary school, and I've never been enthusiastic enough or had enough energy to teach elementary school. I was much better suited for middle school. So I landed a job at the Department of Education here in Tallahassee in 1992, processing applications for teacher certification applicants. And I had a lot of people support me throughout my career in state government and got to do a lot of different things in education, primarily in K-12, truthfully, before I had the great fortune of having this position with the Florida college system. So I credit all the people that supported me and the great education I got as an educator to where I am now.
So Derrell mentioned he's from Baltimore. Are you originally from Florida?
I'm not. I'm originally from Charleston, South Carolina, or Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, more specifically. But nobody knows where Mount Pleasant is, so I always say Charleston. And I went to undergrad in South Carolina and then came to Florida State for graduate school and met the person I would eventually marry. So here we are.
Here we are. Well, I enjoyed working with you as well when I was in the department, and glad to have you join us. You know, my father actually earned a certificate at some point in his life in voice. He was a singer, which is one way he was able to win my mother over. He heard me sing once as a child, and that's one of the few times I understood what disgust looked like non-verbally. So we stopped there with the music. Had I had a teacher like you, maybe it would have made a difference. So let me go to you, Marguerite. Who is Marguerite Roza, and how did you get to where you are today?
So different path. I started in the military, and I did the military to pay for college, like people did kind of at that time, and found myself teaching thermodynamics at Navy Nuclear Power School, and was impressed by human potential, I guess. We had students come in, enlist in the Navy, and we would train them up and teach them nuclear power. I taught thermodynamics, as I mentioned, and then it seemed like you would blink and they'd be operating nuclear reactors out on carriers and submarines, and it seemed like just amazing human potential. So I got more interested, I guess, in education when most of my colleagues ended up in engineering positions after they got out of the Navy. So I kind of went that path, went back to graduate school in education, and you know, obviously had some quantitative background. So gravitated toward the numbers, and also who doesn't like money? So school finance, I think, is maybe the most interesting area of education. It's sort of the piece of the puzzle where, you know, all the cash is where all the stakeholders are interested, all the bodies are buried, the stories are there to tell. So I've found it fascinating ever since.
Where's original home for you?
I grew up in California. I've lived in a lot of different states now, but what confuses some people is that I work for Georgetown. We have a research center, Edgeonomics Lab, but live in Seattle. So I guess that's just part of our new kind of virtual world. But we do have offices out here in Seattle that are part of Georgetown.
And that's one of the reasons I made sure to put Eastern Standard Time, because we've got you on the West Coast, but we also, with Elisa, have someone who's west of us. So who is Elisa Clements?
Sure, thanks, Gerard. I actually grew up in California in the Bay Area, but I've always had a passion for education. And when I was in college, my dad launched a chapter of Children's Scholarship Fund in Utah, where we had moved to. And that experience of watching these scholarships be funded to low-income families here and seeing the great need and demand and the serious injustice in the public school system really opened my eyes to the opportunities there, and also piqued my interest in public policy solutions. And I've essentially spent my entire career working on school choice.
So we have 3 people from California, because I grew up in Los Angeles. So there's definitely a West Coast piece here. So, you know, Derrell, you're now the president of 50 Can. I know what 50 Can is. Talk to us about your organization, and how did this year, particularly with COVID-19, impact you as a leader, your organization, and what you could do?
Yeah, so great question. So 50 Can is a national organization that supports local leaders that are trying to improve education policy through like grassroots advocacy, lobbying, or elections. We have like 10 campaigns across the country. We call our local efforts campaigns, about half in blue states, half in red states. We are a sort of a deeply pragmatic organization that is committed to bipartisanship and getting policy wins for kids, which seems to be a rather dangerous position to take right now, but that's going to be our story, and we're sticking to it, and we're sort of lucky to ally with a lot of the folks on this call, including yourself, Gerard. The one thing I would just say, maybe 2 things. So I've gotten a lot of phone calls during the pandemic where people are like, how are you doing? And I'm like, look, all of my problems are first world problems, right? And I always think it's important to acknowledge that. Like, I was fortunate enough to work in the realm of ideas, and that matters a great deal to me. And like, while the world was sort of very physically perilous a lot of the time, like I didn't have to interact with that in a way that many other people do. So I just want to throw that out there with some humility and respect for the circumstances. As far as how this moment affected 50 Can, though, I would say there were two and a half things that happened. So one was that we just radically sharpened our policy vision, I think. We wrote these 2 briefs, our CEO and I, called Fund Everything and Measure Everything. And they were kind of, I know they sound like a smash and grab or like an anti-Hayek treatise, but we were sort of like, look, parents are making all these decisions in the moment to deal with challenges of education that have been brought on by COVID. We need more sophisticated systems, school finance being one of them, that respect that and enable it, right? In a way that not only meets the moment, but that catalyzes the future. So we did that, and we've sort of been on sharpening a policy vision for the 50 Can network quite a bit over the last year and a half. So that's the one thing. The second thing I would just say, and I don't know, I'm gonna sound like a bit of a hater, but sometimes you got to drink some haterade. So here comes a big cup of it. In all of my life, having this job, I've been trying to convince people that there are fundamental issues with the American public education system that just more acutely affect people without a lot of choice and with a lot of melanin and not a lot of money, a lot more than everybody else. And people look at you and they're like, yeah, maybe, it must be the parents, it must be the families, whatever. And the thing that's been unique about the last year is that all these people who thought they got great public schools with their fancy mortgages are like, oh man, you were right. I can't believe you said, I can't believe the system is so, unresponsive, right? And so while I would love to sort of be gleeful about that, the fact that more people have been hip to the fact that there's a whole constituency in the country for whom this kind of relationship with traditional district schooling is the norm, is an opportunity to make positive change. So that's sort of like the second thing. And the half thing is just like, a lot of people want to like turn the page on the last year and a half, and they're like, oh yeah, like let's put that behind us. And like teachers are great, and my neighborhood school's great, and like let's get all back to it. And for me, that is a mistake, because the one thing that I think should be evident to every like American citizen of any stripe who cares about the future of this republic, right, is that the public education system has the equivalent of like long COVID. So it is a persistent condition that isn't going away unless you are honest about the fact that it's there and you want to treat it. And we see like how school finance is arranged, right? We see the sort of horrible legacy of school assignment as a proxy of like redlining and things that happened before that, right? We see, teacher pay issues, right? We see like lack of opportunity for lots of kids, right? Not just for low-income kids that live in cities, but lots of kids, right? And now we have this looming crisis of 2 years of incredibly disrupted learning that everybody acts like isn't there, and people seem intent on not measuring. So the opportunity and the danger is like, so we've been thinking about those things, and we hope more people want to think about them with us.
Thank you. So let's go to you, Kathy. You're higher ed. Talk to us about the Florida college system, who you represent, a few things about the system you think we should know.
Thanks. I love the opportunity to do that. And I just have to say, though, I have to piggyback on one thing that Darrell said, and that is, I am glad to be in Florida. Florida is not perfect. There was nothing that anybody did that didn't have risk during the last 2 years. But the idea that we already had an infrastructure of choice in Florida that is just about everywhere. We're not done. Success is never final. That's a true statement. But we have done so much hard work, controversial work, as it not perfect, but so much hard work and choice. And we did take a risk and open schools back up earlier than other states did. And it was a risk. It was not a simple decision. It was not perfect. It carried risk with it. But the risk of not doing it was so much greater to our kids. And so we have other things that we're fighting and struggling with, absolutely. But I'll tell you that and just opening back up wouldn't have been enough if we didn't also have the choice mechanisms already there for parents. We basically have controlled open enrollment in Florida. You don't have to even stay in your same school district, much less your neighborhood school, if you don't want to. And the challenge for us, of course, is not the proliferation of choice, but always making sure they're good, high quality choices. That's our challenge. And that really kind of leads me into one of the great things about our Florida college system. Sometimes people think of us as the college system because we're the 28 community and state colleges in Florida. There's a separate university system, state university system, and our K-12 public schools, of course, are separate systems. And sometimes we think of ourselves as having the middle child complex. Everybody's excited about university, they're excited about K-12, and oh, that's right, we have a college system. But we also call ourselves the Great 28, and that I like to think of us as being in the sweet spot, actually, between K-12. We bring K-12 students, some of which who are accelerating anyway, and some of which who would have never thought of themselves in post-secondary education. We give them opportunities to be in and be successful in post-secondary education. We have over 80,000 students a year that participate in dual enrollment in Florida. We have about 2.8 million K-12 students, about 700,000 Florida college system students, and another 350,000 or so state university students. And we also then, in Florida, we have a system we call the 2+2 system in post-secondary education, so that if you get your associate in arts degree from any Florida college system institution, that guarantees you admission into upper division in any state university in Florida. And you may have to start in a program you're not prepared for because you still got to do prerequisites to get into really specific programs, but that AA degree counts as your general education. No one's going to ask you to go repeat any lower division courses in your general education degree. And some states still can't even start that conversation. So we are blessed with that system in Florida. So in the colleges, we get to help K-12 support returning adults and propel 18, 19-year-olds into the state university system. About 41% right now of the students in upper division in our state university system started in our Florida college system. So that's a remarkable statistic. I'm really, really proud of that. That gives you a little bit about the Great 28. We also either win the Aspen Prize every year or we're a finalist for it, the Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence every single year. I just have to say that. And US News and World Report has called Florida's higher education system, which is us plus the university system, #1 in the nation for the past 5 times. So now that I've finished the commercial, I will talk a little bit more about what you were asking me, which is what are some of the things that were important to us, lessons learned through COVID, and some things that I think are really important. I think one of the main things that we did, sort of building on our reputation in the college system for being nimble and responsive, was actually being nimble and responsive. We did, to the best of our ability, we did not lower standards for things that students needed to learn and fundamental academic requirements for students. But what we did was think differently about how those things were delivered to students and the supports around students that they needed to be successful. We still lost students during COVID, just like everybody else did. It was tough, and there's still a stubbornness about the general associate and arts student that we're trying to recover, even though our workforce programs have blossomed during and after COVID. But I say that because we've done things like embedding tutors and librarians in courses. We've done what everybody else has done, which is really turn how we deliver remote instruction on its ear. It's not the same online instruction that you used to get even 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And thanks to new technology and folks that stepped up in that regard too, we've been able to really, really pivot in that direction and continue what is our mission already, which is to reach the individuals in our communities, in our regions that we're responsible for, and make sure they have real access to higher education. You talked about some of that earlier, where depending on your neighborhood and depending on where you're from and the color of your skin and how much money you have, what do you really have access to? And I will tell you that our colleges have really doubled down on making sure that neighborhoods, people in neighborhoods throughout Florida, really have access to higher education. So I think we did those two things really well. We're not done with anything. And I know we made some mistakes along the way, but I think those two things are probably the most important.
Definitely have some follow-up questions for both you and Darrell. In fact, I'm going to go to Marguerite now. So same question for you. Talk to us about Edgeonomics, what led you to create it, and how did COVID-19 impact the lab, who you work with, and all those great things?
Edgeonomics Lab is a center focused solely on education finance and all things related to how money is used, who makes the decisions, how we track it. It's all about money. And I started working before in a research center called Center on Reinventing Public Education, and kind of became the finance person, and then went for a while to the Gates Foundation and came back out. And while I was at the Gates Foundation as an economic advisor, I had a chance to kind of think maybe more holistically about kind of the topic of finance, and thought we really don't have a lot of groups out there doing this, and maybe we need a dedicated group. So when I left, launched the Edgeonomics Labs. It's just a made-up word, is a combination of education and economics, and got that going. And it seems like I thought maybe we're going to run out of issues to cover. We haven't. This year has been maybe the most intense ever for school finance. It's been, whiplash. We finished the last year wondering if the previous year wondering if the pandemic was going to kick off plummeting of the economy, and that was going to result in a lot fewer dollars for schools. The state budgets have fully recovered and then some. And we've passed 3 waves of federal relief of the size we've never seen before. So we've been working to help districts. All that money, went to districts. So the districts got it. And suddenly districts were in the hot seat. Like, we got to decide how we're going to spend this infusion of federal funds. And so we've been working hard to help districts get up to speed to have the capacity to make those decisions. Turns out we don't train district leaders much on finance when they go through their administrator prep programs. So they get to learn on the job, and we've been helping them do that, learn on the job, both spotlighting good things they've been doing, highlighting challenges that they face, offering alternatives for some of the options that they have, and we've been tracking it all. So that's the year's been filled with finance. I'm waiting for the slow period. We've not had it yet, so we'll see.
We'll look forward to following up with you as it relates to school districts and money. So let's go to you, Elisa. American Federation for Children, what is it? How did the pandemic hit your organization? However you want to define it.
Sure. So AFC is the nation's largest school choice organization, advocacy organization. We work to empower families with the freedom to choose the best education for their children. We basically do 3 things. We help elect leaders to public office who support school choice policies. We then work to advocate for school choice policies at the state legislative level. And then we work to ensure that those programs that are passed work for families. So a lot of outreach to particularly to low-income families. The pandemic certainly disrupted what we were doing. We had to pivot very quickly. When the pandemic first hit, that was in the middle of most legislative sessions. So a lot across the country, most sessions ended early or were suspended. Everything went on the election side, everything had to shift, and our outreach to families went virtual. But we were really successful in the 2020 election cycle. We had invested in 396 legislative races. We won 85% of those, which allowed us to go into 2021 legislative sessions with an excellent crop of leaders who were committed to school choice and passing bold policies. And so you take that combined with this wave of parent outrage and frustration at the way their children's education had been handled in the public system, and the things that Derrell talked about, this realization that just because they bought into a great school district, bought a home in a great school district, doesn't mean that they're getting a great education. All of that outrage, I think, contributed to legislators and governors being emboldened to enact school choice policies. So this year, it's been called the Year of School Choice, and we've seen 22 states create, expand, or improve school choice programs. And we've estimated that will generate an additional $900 million in public funding for kids who enroll in school choice programs. So it's been an exciting year, but as I think Kathy said, it's not over. There's so much more to be done.
Thank you. So Derrell, let's go to you. One of the reasons I know you're involved with 50 CAN and throughout your career, you made sure that we've kept public education on the forefront. Majority of our students in the United States who are school-age children will remain in public schools. That will be their option. People buy, like you say, into neighborhoods. What are 2 examples that you can provide us of what public schools got right this year as related to responding to all the things that we've seen? Because people, as they go into 2022, are going to be looking for examples for the home team. What are 2 that you saw that we should know about?
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to be like, which public schools? Because the ones in my neighborhood got very little correct. So let me pick somebody that I think I can use as a glowing example. So how about Jillian Below, who is or is it Balo? She's the superintendent in Wyoming. And I know you might think, Wyoming, whatever. But she has a hard job and it's a political job. They sort of made the commitment to be in person immediately, decided to do it and made everybody do it in a way that kept the ritual of going to school intact for Wyoming's children. And I commend her for that. And I just want to like add kind of like a little rejoinder to this. Like, I'm not a virtual learning advocate, but certainly some kids learned well virtually during the pandemic. And I think that's an option that needs to be protected. Like, you can't give it to people and then unilaterally take it away because you want to know where they are and you want to be able to finance your operations with their attendance. So I just want to like, I'm not saying in-person great, like virtual bad. I'm saying that like this specific instance of in-person learning in a statewide context was done very well, and I think that's worth noting. I know you were like public schools, neighborhood schools, like the home team, but I'm going to broaden the definition of public schools because, like, certainly one of the things that like the charter sector for the most part did was figure out how to deliver competent virtual quickly, and I will shout out for my home team, Success Academy, where I'm a board member, because I can remember I was in Georgia on like, maybe it was March 13th or March 12th. It was that Friday of 2020 when the world ended. And a New York Times reporter was like subtweeting me and trolling me for not being at home. And Success Academy said, we're going virtual on Monday. And I called Eva Moskowitz and I was like, thank you for your leadership on this. And we stood a whole thing up, right? Like literally sort of in a week. And it got better and better and better over time. And for me, I was always like, we need to kind of like package this up and expose it to the world. Like during the pandemic, I was like, we should just send people a link so that they can, like audit basically, because you knew the quality of virtual options in a lot of places just weren't like very good, and like I felt pretty confident that we had like a good one. That's so I will credit, not exclusively, but in the main, like public charter schools for showing like how you could deliver high quality virtual instruction at a scale we never thought we'd have a chance to do. And certainly there were other folks who were doing that. So those are kind of my two things. I'll throw some other folks a bone. I will give it up for superintendents who I know were trying hard as hell to make it work, and the people around them weren't letting them make it work. Like Austin Butner and like Janice Jackson in Chicago. They really had no-win situations, which is a Star Trek reference for the geeks out there. And really tilted at a windmill to make it happen. And though I would say that the results were not what they wanted, it was nice to see somebody stand up for kids in that way.
And thanks so much for talking about superintendents, because they probably had one of the hardest jobs in the country.
Totally agree.
Whether you're appointed or elected, all of a sudden you had to become either a health expert or start having relations with the director of health services in your city or county in ways you did not before. And all of a sudden, you also had to start working with real estate developers and those who were involved with zoning, because all of a sudden, maybe your county or your city became a magnet for families who said, well, if I'm not going to go to school in person, why don't I think about moving to another place? And Charlottesville has been a recipient of a number of people from, I say, the Northeast and New England who've come here for that exact reason. And for those who may not know about Success Academy in New York City, and so that's a place to take a look. But since we're on K-12, Elisa, let me go to you. A similar question, what are two things or models that you think the private schools got right that you want to share with us to highlight?
Like Darrell said, in relation to charter schools, private schools, we're listening to parents, and I think that was the number one thing is really listening to their customers. And private schools, for the most part, were able to, they did shift online very quickly, like Darrell's example of Success Academy, and they stayed open. I believe it was this fall, 90% of private schools were open when, there was still a lot of public schools that were straggling and struggling to get open. So private schools were creating additional seats. They saw the demand. They knew they needed to provide options. They were more willing to expand program offerings or different modes of instruction, and really engage parents as partners in the process and listen to what parents were interested in. I think those are the big things. And Kathy had mentioned earlier being nimble, and I think that's one of the best things that private schools and charter schools can do, is to be nimble in a situation like we faced with the pandemic.
In the number of states that you work in, is there one state that you think we should take a look at in terms of, here was a state where there was a legislature, governor, combination thereof with local systems who said, this is what we're going to do as it relates to children who are going to private schools?
Florida is
tough to pick out one state amongst all of them, because the ones you didn't pick, or they're going to call you and say, hey,
yes.
you talked about what I did.
Yeah. I don't want to pick favorites, but Florida is always the shining star for our work on all forms of choice, and really the collaboration among leadership, publicly elected leadership, and schools to really do what's best for families. So I'd probably point to Florida.
They still have the country's largest tax credit program, 100,000 plus students. Majority of them are lower income families, Black and brown, also some white students as well. And the research doing apples to apples comparison has shown some great things there. So since we're talking about Florida and we've done the K-12, people have really overlooked some of the success stories at the post-secondary level. Now, part of it could be, Elisa and Derrell, of course, they've got, constitutionally mandated populations that say you have to go to school up to a certain age. People decide, above age, even if they're over 21 in some states, decide, I want to go to your system. Is there, one or two of your colleges or a partnership with a K-12 system that you said, here are two things that they got right, and it's something that people should take a look at and tell us why?
Try to stay humble as a Floridian, that we still have things to work on and we do struggle, but it's great it's nice to hear from people outside the state they look to Florida for examples of good things. And I would say that you mentioned partnerships, and I think partnerships are really not just important, but essential in education. And I mentioned dual enrollment earlier, and I think one of the things that people could actually look at was written up, where you can find it online, is Aspen did a dual enrollment playbook, and they featured Florida among several other states, and some partnerships between some of our school districts and colleges that really gave students of all backgrounds, and as I mentioned earlier, students that wouldn't necessarily see themselves or be seen by other people as higher ed potential, and giving them opportunities to participate in both regular college credit, general education, getting started on those first gateway courses, and also a resurgence of career dual enrollment in courses that lead to industry certifications or short-term certificates. That's been the bread and butter, as it's more than a cottage industry now across the country, in getting people into workforce education and short-term education programs. And we also are doing that with our high school students and giving them those opportunities through dual enrollment before they finish, and then have an opportunity to make a decision that's not going to be good for them for a number of years, if not their whole life, getting them hooked on something they really love and can make money at and make a good living wage at, and provide for themselves and their families, and really have their dreams take off while they're in high school. And show them the potential. So I think the dual enrollment playbook by Aspen is a place where people can look to see examples of that. I would credit us for that for sure. And again, it's sort of like the choice infrastructure I was talking about, 700 charter schools. We've got a proliferation of charter schools around our state, so they are plentiful. Dual enrollment is also plentiful. So we had somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 students last year earned their AA at the same time they got their high school diploma. And so we've got a lot of good opportunities for students for early college and collegiate high school and things like that too, along with those who need those couple of credits and a boost to make sure they have the confidence to succeed in post-secondary.
And it's so important to talk about dual enrollment because there's a financial benefit to the state by having students come out with those kind of credentials. That's one part. Number two, there's some students who may decide, I don't want to go directly into a 4-year program, but I want to go into a trade, or I want to start a business, I want to go into the military, or I want to do something else. And they're actually leaving with credentials that will be helpful later on. And one thing that the pandemic definitely highlighted, we've talked about this for years, and of course, all 4 of you know, the number of students who graduate from high school with a diploma that we said prepared them to enter college, and yet they go to college and have to take remediation courses, sometimes 1, 2, 3 semesters. They're non-college bearing courses, and we know that research is showing us, particularly for first-gen students, students from certain neighborhoods, if you get to some, quarter 3 or semester 3, there's a struggle because there's a tipping point at which point you may not finish. And guess what? You now have loans and no credential. And so those were 2 good examples. So Marguerite, you talked about money, and we know that money matters. And when people tell me that money does not matter, I say, give me your wallet, give me your credit card. We'll see if it doesn't matter or not when you get the statement at the end of the month. You talked about 3 waves of money. So for our listeners and viewers, talk to us about the 3 waves of the money. Where did it go and why? And same question for you. Is there 1 or 2 districts who you think are doing innovative things with the money that we should know about so that we can look at it across the board?
Sure. So the first chunk moved out right after the pandemic started in a sort of quick and bipartisan effort. So sometimes even money can be bipartisan. So that's exciting. Anyway, and then there were pretty quickly after that, 2 more waves. So a wave of money that came out about 1 year ago. And then after the administration change, the largest sum, about $2,400 per student, went out in March. And it went to districts. There, we could think about ways that the federal government could distribute money. They could do competitive grants to try to fund innovation. They could give money to states like they did in Race to the Top. Remember that. They could fund, types of programs or services for kids. But this time they gave it to districts and with very few strings attached. If you're a higher poverty district, you did get more money, sometimes as much as $5,000, $7,000, $10,000 a student. If you were a wealthier district, you actually may have gotten none in that because we use the Title I formula to drive the dollars out. And the money was really flexible. And the interesting thing is it came with a clause that said, you got to talk to your community about it. You have to meaningfully engage your community, come up with a plan and do that. And some districts did a better job of really engaging their communities. And I would say that's been one of the successes of this is there's more conversation going on between districts and communities, and that's overdue. So we need to be engaging with our schools, even with our parents and with our kids about what would work to get them back on track and what do they want to see from this money. And that's smart politically too, because if you want more money in the future and people say, well, you don't even know how they spent it, well, that's going to hurt you, right? So if you say we were responsive and this is what we heard from our community and this is how we made mid-course corrections. So we think that in places where there was more responsiveness, that is a new and positive sign from this. And another one I would say, this is going to be surprising for some of you all, salary schedules. And I say that because the historic traditional salary schedule that you're going to pay people based on how long they've been here and a master's degree and a percentage raise based on that has been so resistant to change, even though we know it is so overdue for change. It doesn't explain why, it doesn't do anything when you're having a shortage of science teachers and you have way too many theater teachers. But no, we're going to stick with that and we're going to reject any change. But during the pandemic, we've seen districts actually use some really innovative ways to pay people. They've done flat rates, so everybody gets a dollar amount. That's different than a percentage, and that matters because percentages drive much more money to our most senior teachers, and all the turnover is among the junior teachers. So even seeing a flat dollar, we've seen targeted payments like, hey, if you want to be a special ed teacher, you can get a $3,000 signing bonus. Or moving costs or retention pay if you stick around for 3 years for certain fields like in science or in like I said, special education is another shortage area. And so I think we've seen much more pay for stipends or workload. I don't know if these things are going to stick around, but these non-recurring payments, even that's new. It used to be when you gave a raise, you got it for life. So I think the pay innovations are really promising. And the fact that we did them quickly without overthinking them all, I'm hoping some of them stick around. They're much more nimble way to respond to the labor market and get school districts what they need. I mean, otherwise we've had years and years of classrooms with subs because, we weren't going to pay more to teach in a hybrid school or something like that. So I think that's promising. We've seen some districts move money down to schools. Chicago's doing some of this, and that allows the schools to be responsive to their community, so they get the choice on how to use that money. We think that's been promising. We've seen even some places like in the Boston area paying teenagers to take summer classes. We like this idea of moving some money to families so families can decide how to use it. Idaho did that, let people pick out their own laptop and purchase their own laptop, that kind of thing. So, I think we've underutilized that strategy of maybe even paying parents to sit with their kids and read with their kids or keep them on Khan Academy or those kinds of things. But we are seeing a sprinkling of those ideas. And I think those are a promising strategy for districts to try out when they have this flexible money.
Can I jump on that, Gerard?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so I just want everybody to know we are great admirers of Marguerite and the made up Edgeonomics Lab over at 50 Can, and think that the work she's doing is sort of like seminal for all this. So again, 2.5 things. One is that we're totally on board with the fun families thing. And I say that as like a proxy for the fact that we could be using this money to set the financial framework for the system that we need instead of just shoring up the system that we have, right? We could be building a more like diverse, resilient, like personalized system that has like all the institutions and people like churches, apprenticeships, museums, all the places that came into the discussion about education during the pandemic. Like we could be building a financial framework that preserves that, right? And that I think requires almost too much imagination for a lot of the folks that have been charged with spending the money. But I do like to continue to hold up that as the highest priority. Like we could be doing that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. The second thing I would just say, because now I'm going to get like less happy about it, is that I have like the examples Marguerite cites are like me calling up Wyoming, right? There are way fewer good ones than there are bad ones. And I just highlight this because there is like an acceptance, unfortunately, amongst advocates and status quoists that this $190 billion, like you would get more out of it if it was a cold day and you threw it in the middle of the town square and lit it on fire so people could get warm next to it, right? Because there's no direction for the spending of the money. Like people have a list, they like, you just work down a list, right? Like giving away retention bonuses is sort of like a default position in a lot of places. Like Memphis, nobody was in school, right? But you got a retention bonus for coming back to a school you didn't go to, right? I mean, it sort of like strains credulity in a lot of places. And I do think that tax-paying citizens, legislators, all this other stuff. Marguerite made a great point about this money going directly to districts. That is a political move, right? Because if you put it through the political process, right? If a governor or a state legislature had their say, we might have gotten one of these other outcomes. Instead, the money just went into the black box of district finance. And as Marguerite intimated earlier, even the people who are in charge of those black boxes don't always know what to do with the money. So in the future, this is a $190 billion tax increase, right? Like, there's a lot of talk about funding cliffs. Everybody is getting in a car and riding as fast as they can for the cliff and going off of it screaming like Bush and Sundance, right? So I do want to highlight for everybody that in the future, this bill is going to come due, right? And it will become a local problem, right? So people need to think about that. And then the last thing I would just say, I was giving a speech to a bunch of legislators, a captive audience, they couldn't go nowhere. And I was like, listen, you need to save school. This is why transparency is important. I'm like, you need to save these school districts for themselves, because there is a move at the federal level. And I would just put, Terry McAuliffe's chief spokesperson, Randy Weingarten, and her road dogs, I will call them responsible for it, like to eliminate data from the equation of student performance, right? And for the right reasons, we had waivers like during the pandemic, but for the wrong reasons, we see a lot of people who are still trying to like stifle or eliminate that data. And in a couple of years, there's going to be no information and $190 billion that just like went up in smoke. And that will destroy confidence in the institution, right? So I say that not as a person who wants that outcome. I say that as a person who sees that outcome as the inevitable end state of the current situation. The bill is coming due. Watch what's going on, and you could be doing something better with this money.
So, Elisa, both Derrell and Marguerite talked about no strings attached. I mean, some of the stuff is very historic. And we know for the money for the private schools, particularly in the second round, there were some clauses on where it could be spent, particularly with private schools. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, and I am probably not the expert on all of that, but I will say in general, private schools did not have enough. They did not take enough of them did not take advantage of the opportunity to receive these funds. The strings that were attached often limited their use to like cleaning supplies and those types of things that were maybe immediate needs, but not sufficient to really help the schools utilize the funds in ways that they needed. So there were, while some were able to benefit from that federal funding, that massive influx of funding, too much of those funds are stuck at the state level or district level and not being distributed to schools, private schools that should be eligible for it.
And South Carolina, in fact, found itself being sued when the governor wanted to use some of that money for a choice program. We hardly ever talk about all the money that was invested also in higher ed. So how are you seeing the school finance, I guess college finance debate taking place with your schools? What have the president said? How have you gotten involved with that?
Thanks, I appreciate that. And I also appreciate all the things that are being said about the K-12 finance. I think with all the things to continue to work on in K-12, the financing of education, and thinking about not financing it on seat time. It's really, that's one of the tougher conversations to keep the money flowing where education's actually happening. If you don't have accountability, if you don't know what's going on, then you don't have a hope of doing anything but financing seat time. So back onto higher ed. So half of the money that institutions drew down for higher ed, it went straight to them. It didn't come to the State Department. It went straight to institutions, but that's typical. It's not like K-12 where things come to the DOE first. Half of it had to be spent, having to be given directly to students as aid, and not replacement for tuition. So the college got the money back, but aid to the student to cover all kinds of other expenses they may have experienced during COVID. Later, you were able to spend allow students to spend some of it on tuition or other books, materials, things like that. But initially, the first 50% went straight into their hands to help with food, gas, whatever needs they had, they could choose. The colleges have also struggled a little bit with some of the restrictions that are on the higher ed funds. But I will tell you some of the things they have done with the money that were allowed by the restrictions, which is use it to buy really good equipment. So there isn't anybody right now who should be lacking in simulation equipment for a nursing program or new routers or communication or broadband or anything else that you needed to somehow outfit your institution to improve communications and safety, and everybody should have a new HVAC system. All that stuff should be done because you can associate all that with the pandemic. What they are looking for, at least in Florida, is money to actually renovate buildings. Because now I have great equipment that I didn't have before for a nursing program, but I've got an old classroom building that as soon as I touch it, the asbestos is going to fall out of the walls, because we were built in the 50s and 60s, a lot of our buildings, and so we've got some work to do. But the money, they've really tried to have a mindset of this is not recurring dollars. So yes, sometimes they gave bonuses to their faculty or signing bonuses or things like that. But even beyond the 50%, a lot of it went to student aid, for sure. And then the types of temporary one-time infrastructure spends that you can do to get those things kind of shored up for your workforce programs.
Got it. This is more of a general question that is coming to mind now based upon hearing all of you talk. Rural education. They have had dynamics for years, often for a lot of reasons because of political clout, because of the state capital often being anchored in an urban area. Rural schools didn't receive a lot of attention. They did in part this time because of issues with connectivity, bandwidth, money, and also human resource or talent pipeline. Great talent there, but some people left and said we just can't fill it. What are some of your thoughts about rural education, what we learned this year, and maybe some aha moments as we think about 2022? Anyone can jump in.
I'll start.
Yeah,
if you want.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, because our college system is we have the largest undergraduate institution in the country, in Miami-Dade College, which is mostly urban, but it also serves some outer areas in Miami-Dade County. And then we also have North Florida College. Miami-Dade's got over 100,000 students. North Florida College probably has 1,500 students. And it covers the tiny rural areas in the top part of Florida that are not in the Panhandle. And that's an area of Florida where hardly anybody lives. And it's not like it's the Everglades where there's some other reason, like it's preserved, it's people don't live there. And so their infrastructure needs are really tough. And it wasn't just the students who struggled during the pandemic to be online, the professors struggled to be online from their homes. And so a lot of colleges did what everybody else did, which is buy everybody a new computer, make sure they had a laptop that worked or a tablet that worked, but there were still struggles with infrastructure. So I think that getting somebody, getting a company, get the right people who care about those areas of our state that will invest and allow people to live and work and stay there. It's something meaningful and make a living wage or better is going to be continuing to be a struggle. Even in a state like Florida, where you look at the general, once you get an average, you really do mask a lot of things that are going on. Mm-hmm. And so I would tell you that those struggles, as they say, are real and need the attention of partners who can care and invest for the long term in those areas of a state.
Thank you.
So do you mind if I jump in? I'll say one of the things that public education was sort of short on this last year was trust with communities, and rural schools seem to have an edge on that. They seem to be more maybe touch with communities. They were more likely to be open longer during the pandemic. And we didn't see quite the same battles in rural areas as we did in some suburban and urban areas. And I think that we've forgotten how important that trust and engagement with communities is. In rural communities, schools play a bigger role in the community, and the participation rates are higher in terms of people paying attention to what's going on in the school and coming to meetings and things like that. And that may be keeping them more in touch with their public. And I think that proved to be really important this last year.
Gerard, if I can add on the K-12 side, education savings accounts are the latest iteration of school choice that have really proliferated. A lot of states passed new ESA programs this year, and it is a great model to provide ultimate customization for families, including allowing families in rural areas to access classes or tutoring or different options that they just don't have simply because of where they live. And Darrell mentioned Success Academy, the exceptional instruction that was being provided virtually. That type of thing could be available where if I lived in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi, and being able to access a great math class being taught in New York City, it's really exciting, the potential there.
Yeah, I would love to just plus one, Elisa's plus one, because I was going to highlight course choice. Well, one of the things I would just say is that I think the pandemic also showed, Marguerite's point notwithstanding, that that urban districts and rural districts are actually very similar, but need different solutions. And I don't think that was something people were thinking about before. If I could push like a little bit harder on that, I also think we're just in a place where it is no longer effective or advantageous to ignore rural constituencies, especially if you want to win a statewide election. And certainly like schools and how you finance schools matter to that. Last thing. So I think we're at this place now. I know we spent a lot of time talking about different policies, and obviously we have Florida in the mix, so you can't have Florida in the mix and not talk about school choice. But I think we're just at this place where like kind of to address the rural issue, like school choice is a different thing now than it was like 2 years ago. So the anchor paradigm is that, the government buys you a seat someplace and you may like it or may not like it. And we want you to be able to buy a different seat, right? And it could be in another school the government runs. It could be in a school a nonprofit runs. It could be in a school the Catholics run, right? Or something like that. And I think that's a strong paradigm for a lot of reasons. But the challenges of the pandemic, right? And I think this rural example is a good one. To me, like, show that the future of school choice is in helping people answer problems of education with the state's money, in whole or in part, in ways that could include a whole seat, but that might not include a whole seat. And it really raises this question of like, how flexible can our institutions be to meet those needs? Maybe I'm a homeschooler. I want football and the lab, right? How can like My Tech High, which is an organization, where they in Utah and Colorado and Kentucky, I think is what it is. They're working with districts to help provide service to homeschool parents, right? Like all of a sudden, everybody seems to get that tutoring is like an important intervention. Well, like tutoring is a private market, like for the most part, it always has been. So you can look at Tennessee, right? Where they had a nonprofit effort, right? And the state funded like 200,000 people to get summer camp and tutoring out of ESSER funds, right? The Idaho model, right? Rural state, whatever. Strong family, strong students. Is that what it's called? I'm trying to remember what it is. My friends who worked on that bill would probably oust me from the circle of trust for not knowing the name off the top of my head. But that was another one where it's like, well, if you need a new computer, here you go, right? If you need internet access, here you go. Like if you want a tutor, here you go. And we saw a similar policy in North Carolina, right? That happened at the end of last session. So I think all of this is incredibly positive because it stops funding a monopoly of education and starts creating a market for one, right? That is like nuanced and that meets people at a level that just like the seat paradigm does not. And if anything sort of comes out of the last like year and a half that I think is really super positive, I think it's that.
Got it. Marguerite, I want to follow up on a point you said, and this is open for everyone. You mentioned that schools of education have not done a great job of preparing administrators to understand the nuances of school finance and funding. And in fact, many of the principals do not have a lot of authority to sign checks or make decisions above a certain amount. Teachers have been equally impacted by what took place this year. So for you, and then others can follow, what advice do you have for schools of ed in terms of what they should be thinking about in terms of not only training administrators for 2022, but also the educators?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've been pretty clear about calling on department of colleges of ed in universities to put in more finance curriculum. So you've got to teach people about the money. And a lot of them will say, well, that's not their job right away, but it is their job. Even if they're not making the decisions on how to spend the money, they are stewards of the resources under their care. So if you're a principal and you don't realize that the counselor down the hall is an $85,000 investment, you may just think that's just a person sitting there and I'm not in charge of it, and may not be leveraging that $85,000 investment to get the full value for kids. And we see that a lot where principals are not understanding the amount of resources that they are supervising. So we think that, at that level all the way up, people need better understanding of finance, what things cost, what trade-offs there are, and what we should expect in return. And unfortunately, we haven't even really spent much time on the data part of it. So this is how much we've invested in this school, and these are the outcomes. And people need to be able to look at that data. So I think the data conversation, we need to get a lot better at it. It's overdue. It's not okay to operate in a system and not be able to process and use data. Everybody has to do that. And the schools need to teach that as well. But down to the teachers, I think, a lot of the teachers were caught off guard on how to switch to a virtual model and be nimble and change in that. And I think that's because we haven't really prepared them for that. And that maybe caught us off guard for sure. But when you were talking about rural schools, my own kids went to a rural public school a few years ago, and they sort of seamlessly went back and forth between virtual learning and in-person learning. And that was how they offered a more robust curriculum for their school, because it turns out they didn't have enough teachers to teach AP Econ or Latin or things that some of the classes that kids want to take. But hey, if you could find an online class, your third period could be sitting in the library taking AP Econ, which is something that my kids did those things while they were there. So these skills don't need to just be useful in a pandemic. Teachers should be able to kind of supervise kids going back and forth between more virtual options and not. And they're even in the world of tutoring, we've gotten some amazing technology resources that can make tutoring a lot better. Not everybody has to know, everything about tutoring. If you sit with a kid and go through Khan Academy, the content is there and progresses at a proper rate and is responsive to the kid. So we need to teach teachers how to use these technological tools so they're set up, even if we're not in a pandemic, but to be able to access and deploy them when we need them to.
Well, we're down to our closing question for each of you to consider. Like I said, I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia. We had a gubernatorial election here. Derrell had one in New Jersey. And in fact, you should read the op-ed that he wrote about both the Virginia and New Jersey election, and some really good insights there. But as we go into 2022, we're going to have over 30 gubernatorial elections across the country, including in 3 territories. And while education is surely one of the 5 items that a sitting governor or someone who wants to unseat her or to replace him or her if it's someone who's term limited, education is really going to be an important topic, both K-12 and higher ed. From the lane that you walk and from what you think about education, just K-20, what's your recommendation to people as they think about this time next year when I'm doing my K-20 in review in December? Some of these people are going to have transition teams, as we do here right now in Virginia, and they're going to be thinking about education. What's your recommendations to them as they think about this? Kathy, I'll start with you.
Thanks. I noted about this question and thought, I don't know that I would have any advice that could help our governor. He would have lots of advice to help me, probably, in education, for sure.
Let me say this. For all the people who are not running.
All the people.
Yes.
I would point to, I'm kidding about that.
All right.
Yes, certainly for all the people. I think that the thing that I've heard all throughout this conversation today in this podcast is the idea, and I think we did a pretty good job of this too, and our governor actually did with the GEAR dollars, the money that came to the governors in the states, is to use those dollars, use the opportunities as an example of how to think about the forwardness. Where are we going from here? People learn differently than they used to. And the pandemic accelerated that. Adults, kids, everybody gathers knowledge, gains experience, transfers information, all those things that we do in education. They do that in lots of different ways and with lots of different capabilities. So I would advise somebody to focus on the future of education and what the possibilities are. And not to disregard the past, cherish our past, hold on to the past, learn from history, and at the same time, and look forward to what are the things we can do next. Be open-minded about the possibilities.
Thank you. Alyssa.
Yeah, first, in terms of electoral strategy, I would say school choice is a winning issue now more than ever. Ignore parents at your own peril. As a candidate, parents want choice. Our polling and many polls show overwhelming demand for school choice among all voters, increasing demand and support even among Democrats and independents, and especially among parents with school-age children. We saw a 13-point jump between 2020 and 2021 among parents who support or who have children, school-age children, in terms of their support for school choice. So, Virginia, as you mentioned, is a prime example of this issue having a huge impact on elections. But I think just recognizing, as has been already stated, that it's important to create a system that is nimble, that provides options, that responds to the way that children learn and have needs today. All of those things are going to be critical as leaders look to both make their sales pitch to voters and also lead once elected.
Thank you. Derrell.
Yeah, I mean, so plus one, all of that from Kathy and Elisa. So I would just say two things. So if you are a prospective voter or constituent of a current governor or a person running for governor, and their plan is to simply put more money into the existing system, that means they don't have a plan. And there's never been a time where it is more irresponsible to have a soundbite than a plan than now, right? So I just want to put that out there. Like, we really need our leaders to lead, and we don't need them to lead us into the same thing, especially when the system is awash in money, like knee deep in it in ways it's never been before. That just means that you're not taking the problem seriously and have given it no serious thought, and our kids deserve better. So I just want to throw that out there. On the other kind of side of this, and I don't want to be too sort of like gloomy and doomy, but I do think this is very serious. So the pandemic is the effect of it is yet to fully present itself, I think. So if you missed a reading window during the pandemic and were like a third or fourth grader, it will take an enormously costly and sort of well thought out intervention for you to ever read, on grade level again, right? There are days in the New York City public school system where the attendance is 25% off of 100% of students being here, and nobody knows who. So there are days when we're spending like $40,000 a kid, here, right? And we don't know where 1 in every 4 kids are, you know? There are kids in places like LA who like high schoolers who just disappeared. And the system's awash in money, so there are no incentives to go find them either, right? And that kid is swinging in the wind right now without a credential or a diploma, and maybe without a path to like a profession or a future or prosperity, right? And all of that is just about to start presenting itself, you know? And so I would just encourage anybody who is thinking about like whatever the role of a governor is in any state or any elected official, right? If you're not thinking about K-12 education, not just public, like all education, but like public school, like your neighborhood, whatever, school district specifically, in a way to address those things, get out of the race, right? You don't deserve to be in power if you haven't given those issues very serious thought. This is like a problem of our lifetime in a way that people don't seem to have quite internalized yet. And it's going to have implications across our entire society. So that is my advice for the voters of many states and their prospective state executives.
Thank you. Last but not least, Marguerite.
Yeah, I'm going to build on that and say, we've taken some time off of talking about student outcomes at all, right? And even when people say, I want to know, if our ESSER investments were a success, I want to know if they worked or not. I want to know this, that, or the other. Mostly they seem to be talking about what did we buy, not what were students able to do or to what extent were they back on track as a result of that money. And I think the lack of talking about the student outcomes is a mistake. And I think people are starting to catch up and realize we gave you some time here to, just talk about changing your operations to make them COVID sensitive and so on. But now we've got to talk about what the students can be able to do. And we can't, and people are noticing, right? A lot of these other conversations have been on the forefront, and schools can't ignore the students and the student outcomes for too long. So I just think that, again, ignoring the student outcome part of this equation will be at their peril. And I know we gave the money to districts, but we can spotlight the outcomes, we can track the outcomes, we can say where they're slipping and where they're making progress. And that needs to be the center conversation for this year going forward. A couple other things to watch, though. I mean, you got to watch this college debt relief debate. People are going to have strong emotions on that one. You've got to watch this Supreme Court case in Maine with the money going to a Christian school. I think that is sort of worth paying attention. And we've really got to watch the cliffs, because the spending cliffs, because that's going to create a lot of news, and people are going to wonder, why are we inflicting this pain on school districts? It's just a bad idea. So those are just some other ones to keep an eye on, because they'll be really important.
Yeah, the Clark case is the one in Maine. In fact, a couple of days ago, I had a chance to interview Michael Bentis, who actually argued on behalf of the families in Maine. So thanks for bringing that up. Well, I want to thank each one of you for your intelligence, for your humor, for your insights, for your pushback, because we have seen a year that many of us may never see again in the same way. I'm sure we'll still have challenges, we'll have triumphs, we'll have drama, but in the way in which this happened, we'll tell our loved ones, families, friends, children, and others for some time to come. But the most important thing is we've now at least documented and captured for generations to come what 4 people who work in this work, who think about it a lot, who get up trying to make the world better, have done so. So let me thank again all of you for what you've done. Again, my name is Gerard Robinson. I'm at the Center for Advanced Studies and Culture here in Charlottesville. Our motto is we study disruptive cultural change and equip leaders to a deep understanding of their times. I want to say happy holidays, happy new year to everyone who either watch, listen, or both. To all of you, have a safe transition into 2022. And the only thing that I would recommend, not only to those who are running to go for governor next year, but really anybody in any state of Commonwealth that we have, let's find a way to be more humane to each other in 2022. With that, take care, everyone.